Imagine dedicating your life to building a perfect family, only to discover it's been built on lies. That's what happened to me. My wife Olivia convinced me to change my life, lose weight, improve myself, and even explore things in our marriage I never thought I'd agree to. But it didn't stop there. One night, she brought her best friend into our home, and everything unraveled. At first, I thought it was just one betrayal, until I started asking questions. And the answers? They shattered my world. I thought I was a father to 2 kids. I thought I knew my wife. But the truth was darker, more twisted than I ever imagined. Looking back, I can't pinpoint the exact moment things started to change. Maybe it was when Olivia became obsessed with my weight. Or maybe it was earlier, something I missed, something subtle. Either way, her persistence worked. I dropped nearly 30 kilograms in a year, transforming from a tired, average dad into someone people barely recognized. At first, I was grateful. I mean, who wouldn't be? Olivia was my biggest cheerleader through it all. She meal prepped with me, cheered me on during workouts, and beamed with pride whenever someone complimented my transformation. But something about her energy changed. Beneath the praise, there was restlessness, a spark I hadn't seen before. Then one evening, she dropped a bombshell. We were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the kids chase each other in the yard. The air was cool, the sunset casting everything in a warm glow. It felt like one of those perfect moments, until she spoke. You know, she began, swirling her wine glass, you've changed so much. I'm really proud of you. I smiled, leaning back in my chair. Thanks, Liv. It feels good to feel like myself again. She glanced at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, half playful, half serious. There's something I've been thinking about. Something I've been wanting to try. I chuckled. What? Skydiving? Salsa dancing? She shook her head, biting her lip like she was holding back a secret. I've been talking to Sarah about it. I frowned. Sarah? What does she have to do with anything? Olivia leaned in, lowering her voice. She and I, well, we've been talking about the idea of having a threesome. I blinked, convinced I hadn't heard her right. What? She thinks it could be amazing for us. Something fun, something different. I stood up, pacing the porch. You're joking, right? No, her tone was calm, matter of fact, like she was suggesting trying a new restaurant. I've thought about it a lot. We've been together for so long, Michael. Don't you think it's time to explore something new? My heart pounded in my chest. This is insane. Where is this coming from? She tilted her head, giving me that look she used when she thought I was being too stubborn. Come on, Michael. You've changed so much. We've changed. Don't you think it's time to let loose a little? Live a little. I'm living just fine, I snapped. I don't need something like that to spice things up. But Olivia wouldn't let it go. She was patient, persistent. Think of it like test driving a sports car, she said one evening, trying to make her case again. We've been driving the family van for years. Don't you ever wonder what it's like to try something faster, more exciting? That metaphor stuck with me. It made me feel like our marriage, our life together, was some boring, practical vehicle she wanted to escape from. But she wouldn't stop. Days turned into weeks of quiet tension. Olivia kept bringing it up, carefully, gently. Each time, I said no. But deep down, I could feel her wearing me down. Her persistence chipped away at me, and I started to wonder if maybe I was the one being too rigid. Finally, after endless talks, I gave in. I told her I'd consider it, but only under 2 conditions. It wouldn't happen in our home, and protection was non-negotiable. Olivia agreed, nodding enthusiastically. Of course, she promised. I'll handle everything. But when the moment came, she ignored everything I asked for. What happened next shattered every boundary I thought we had. It all happened faster than I expected. One moment, Olivia was just talking about it in passing, making it seem like a distant fantasy. The next, she was standing in our living room, looking more excited than I'd seen her in years, saying, "Sarah's coming over tonight." I froze. "Wait, what?" "She's on her way," Olivia said, her voice casual, like she was announcing dinner plans. "It's finally happening, Michael." Panic set in. "Olivia, we agreed." I know," she interrupted, brushing me off with a wave of her hand. "Not at home." "I get it. But listen, this is Sarah. She's my best friend. We trust her. It'll be fine." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Our kids are asleep upstairs. They won't hear a thing," she said, her eyes gleaming. "This is about us, Michael. About doing something exciting together." I shook my head. "No. We had rules." "Rules," she repeated, her tone suddenly bitter. "You always need rules, don't you? Can't you ever just let go? Just once?" I felt my stomach twist. This wasn't the Olivia I knew. Or maybe it was, and I'd just never seen this side of her before. Either way, I didn't like it. Minutes later, Sarah walked in. I stood there awkwardly, feeling like an outsider in my own home as the two of them hugged and giggled like teenagers at a sleepover. Sarah was striking. Always had been. She had that effortless charm that drew people to her, but I never saw her as more than Olivia's friend. Until now. She caught me staring and gave me a sly smile. "Hey, Michael." I nodded stiffly. "Hey." The tension in the room was unbearable. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to make a colossal mistake. "Come on," Olivia said, taking my hand and leading me toward the living room. "Let's just relax. No pressure." But the pressure was suffocating. They opened a bottle of wine, laughing and reminiscing about old times while I sat there, barely able to focus. I couldn't even pretend to be okay with what was happening. And when things started escalating, when Olivia leaned in to kiss Sarah, her hand brushing Sarah's leg, I felt like I was in a dream. Or a nightmare. Then came the moment I'll never forget. Sarah whispered something to Olivia, and they both laughed softly. Olivia turned to me, her eyes locking onto mine. "Come here," she said softly, patting the spot next to them on the couch. I shook my head. "No." Her smile faltered. "Michael. I'm not doing this." My voice was firm, but inside, I was a mess of emotions, confusion, anger, sadness. Olivia's expression shifted, frustration flickering behind her eyes. "You're making this weird." I stood up. "It is weird. I told you, no in the house, and protection." "Where's the protection, Olivia?" She glanced at Sarah, who shrugged. "We weren't planning on using any," she admitted. "That was the breaking point." "No," I said, stepping back. "No way." Olivia stood too, her face twisted in frustration. "Why are you being like this? Why am I being like this? You're seriously asking that?" I ran my hands through my hair, trying to calm down. "Our kids are asleep upstairs. You brought Sarah here without even telling me. And now you're telling me there's no protection. I can't do this." "You're making me uncomfortable," Olivia snapped, crossing her arms. "You agreed to this, Michael. You promised." "I agreed to something completely different," I shot back. "Not this." For a moment, the room was silent. Sarah shifted awkwardly on the couch, clearly unsure what to do. Then Olivia sighed, shaking her head. "I can't believe you're ruining this." "I'm ruining it." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "You crossed every line we set. You're always so rigid," she said, her voice rising. "So scared to take risks. Maybe that's why things have felt boring." The word hit me like a slap. "Boring," I repeated. "Is that what this is about? You're bored?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked away, biting her lip. "I love you," she finally said, her voice softer. I want more." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. Trying to figure out when we had gone from being a happy family to this. I want out of this, I said, my voice trembling with both anger and sadness. You're on your own tonight. Without waiting for a response, I grabbed my coat and walked out the front door. I didn't know where I was going, just that I couldn't stay in that house any longer. As I walked down the street, the cold night air biting at my skin, one thought kept circling in my mind. How did we get here? What I didn't know was that this was only the beginning. I spent that night driving aimlessly, trying to make sense of everything. My mind was in overdrive, memories of Olivia and me from the early days of our relationship, our wedding, the birth of our kids, all of it felt like it belonged to someone else now. How had we gone from that to this? Eventually, I pulled into a parking lot near a park we used to take the kids to. I sat there for hours, staring at the empty swings, until exhaustion finally won. When I got home, it was past midnight. The house was dark, quiet. I half expected Olivia to be waiting up for me, but the living room was empty, save for a faint trace of wine in the air and an abandoned glass on the coffee table. I crept upstairs, careful not to wake the kids. Peeking into their rooms, I saw Jeremy fast asleep, clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur, and Melissa curled up under her pink blanket. I stood there for a while, watching them breathe peacefully. They have no idea, I thought. No idea how close their world was to crumbling. I crawled into bed beside Olivia, who was already asleep, or at least pretending to be. Her back was turned to me, her breathing steady. I didn't say anything. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if there was any way to fix what was broken. The next morning, I woke to the sound of clattering dishes downstairs. The kids were getting ready for school, and Olivia was moving through the kitchen like nothing had happened. "Morning," she said when I walked in. Her voice was neutral, as if she wasn't sure how I'd respond. "Morning," I replied, grabbing a cup of coffee. The tension between us was unbearable. I waited until the kids were out the door before saying anything. "We need to talk." She sighed, setting down the dish towel. "I know." I leaned against the counter, my arms crossed. "What were you thinking, Olivia? Bringing her into our house? While the kids were home?" Her expression hardened. "I told you, it was supposed to be something for us. Something to bring excitement back." "Excitement?" I repeated, incredulous. "You think the solution to our problems is sleeping with other people?" She crossed her arms. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" For a moment, she didn't answer. She just looked down at the counter, tracing patterns with her finger. Finally, she whispered, "I've been feeling disconnected. Lonely." "Lonely?" I echoed, my voice rising. "We've been married for over a decade. We have 2 kids. You think I haven't felt lonely sometimes? But I never once thought the answer was this." Her eyes flicked up to meet mine. There was something there, guilt, regret, but also something else. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. My heart stopped. I knew, instinctively, that whatever she was about to say would change everything. I wasn't completely honest with you," she continued. "About Sarah." "What do you mean?" Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the counter. This wasn't her first time coming over. We've been seeing each other." I stared at her, the words not fully sinking in. "Seeing each other? Like, what? You've been having an affair with her?" She nodded slowly, her face pale. My world tilted. "How long?" "About a year," she whispered. "It started when we went on that girls' weekend to the lake. I didn't plan it, Michael. It just happened." "It just happened," I repeated bitterly. "That's what people always say when they ruin everything." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I know I messed up. I'm so sorry." I couldn't look at her. I turned away, staring out the window, my mind racing. "How could you do this?" I whispered. How could you bring her into our home, around our kids, knowing what you'd done? I thought if you were part of it, it wouldn't feel wrong anymore. I laughed bitterly. You thought dragging me into your affair would fix things? That's insane, Olivia. She wiped at her eyes. I didn't want to lose you. I love you, Michael. I spun around, fury boiling beneath my skin. You love me? You've been sneaking around behind my back for a year, and you call that love? Her face crumpled, and she sank into a chair. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know who I am anymore. For a moment, I just stood there, watching her fall apart. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her we'd figure it out. But another part, the part that felt shattered beyond repair, wanted to walk out and never look back. You've been lying to me for a year, I said quietly. I don't even know who you are anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. I want to fix this, she whispered. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. But I wasn't sure there was anything left to fix. What I didn't know was that there was more. So much more. I spent the rest of that day in a haze. I couldn't focus on anything except Olivia's confession. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with Sarah, laughing at some private joke I'd never understand. We've been seeing each other for a year. The words replayed in my mind like a broken record. At dinner, Olivia acted like nothing had happened. She helped the kids with their homework, asked about their day, and even cracked a joke about Jeremy's messy hair. I just sat there in silence, watching her like she was a stranger in my own home. After the kids were asleep, I finally broke the silence. Why Sarah? She froze, her hand hovering over the sink as she washed the dishes. Slowly, she turned to face me. I don't know, she said softly. It just happened. That's not good enough, I snapped. You don't just accidentally fall into bed with someone. You made a choice. Over and over again. Her shoulders slumped. I was unhappy. I felt invisible, Michael. You were so focused on work, the kids. I started feeling like I wasn't a priority anymore. I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. So instead of talking to me, you turned to her. She was there, Olivia whispered. She listened. She made me feel alive. I shook my head. And you never thought about what this would do to me? To our family? I thought I could keep it separate, she said. I thought if I brought it to you, we could make it something positive. I thought it wouldn't hurt as much if we did it together. Are you serious? I asked, incredulous. You thought dragging me into your affair would make it better? She wiped at her eyes, trembling. I realize now how wrong I was. Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I need to tell you something else, Olivia said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I sat up straighter, dread settling in my gut. What now? She took a deep breath. The massages, they weren't just massages. My blood ran cold. The expensive ones? I asked, already knowing the answer. She nodded. They had happy endings. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of her words sink in. How long? For years, she whispered. My hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles turning white. Every word out of her mouth chipped away at the life I thought we had. I opened my eyes, locking my gaze on her. How did you pay for them? She winced. From my account. Sometimes, our joint account. You used our money? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. I'm sorry, she said again, her voice trembling. I stood up abruptly, sending my chair scraping against the floor. Olivia flinched as I stepped closer to her. But I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to throw things. Instead, I did something I never thought I'd do. I walked past her to the cabinet, pulled out a bottle of whiskey, and poured myself a glass. I wasn't a big drinker, but at that moment, I needed something to calm my shaking hands. Olivia stood there, watching me, tears running down her cheeks. Michael. I held up a hand, cutting her off. I'm done talking for now. I sat back down at the table, taking a long sip of the whiskey. The burn in my throat was a welcome distraction from the ache in my chest. We'll figure this out tomorrow, I said flatly. But tonight? I just need to sit here and try to wrap my head around all of this. She nodded slowly, wiping her tears. Okay. For a long while, we sat in silence, me at the table, her leaning against the counter, both of us lost in our thoughts. Eventually, Olivia spoke again, her voice small. I'll sleep on the couch tonight. I didn't argue. I just nodded, staring into my glass as she gathered a blanket and left the room. The house was quiet again, but this time, it wasn't comforting. It felt hollow. Empty. I sat there long after she left, nursing my drink, replaying everything she'd told me. Every lie. Every betrayal. Every moment I hadn't seen it coming. When I finally went to bed, the sheets smelled like her. And that's when it hit me, I couldn't even sleep in my own bed without feeling her betrayal. I didn't run out of the house. I stayed. But everything about my home suddenly felt foreign. What I didn't know was that the worst revelation was still coming. I barely slept that night. Olivia's confession about Sarah had shattered me, but something still felt off. There was a nagging feeling in my gut, a sense that the picture she'd painted wasn't complete. Why do I feel like there's more to this? The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee in silence. Olivia hovered by the counter, avoiding my gaze. The air between us was heavy with unspoken tension, both of us waiting for the other to break it. Finally, I spoke. Is there anything else you need to tell me? She froze, her back to me. What do you mean? I leaned forward, setting my cup down carefully. I mean, you've already admitted to Sarah. You told me about the massages. But it feels like you're still holding something back. She turned slowly, her face pale. No. That's everything. But I didn't believe her. Not after all the lies. I thought about the timeline. Her confession about a male masseur. Melissa's birth, something wasn't adding up. And then it hit me like a punch to the gut. Melissa was born around the time you said you were with someone else, I said slowly, piecing it together in my mind. Olivia's face crumpled. No. Michael, please. She's yours. But I couldn't take her word for it anymore. You don't get to say that, I snapped, standing up from the table. Not after everything you've admitted. Her hands trembled as she tried to reach for me. I swear to you, Michael. Melissa is yours. You're her father. But I couldn't shake the doubt. Jeremy, our older child, looked like me in a way Melissa never did. Her features were softer, her mannerisms different. I'd always told myself that kids take after different sides of the family, but now I wasn't so sure. Without saying a word, I turned and left the room, heading straight to my office. The DNA testing kit arrived a few days later. I didn't tell Olivia. I waited for a quiet moment when she was out of the house, then took a sample from both Jeremy and Melissa. I told them it was for a school science project, and they were excited to help. When I mailed the samples, my hands were shaking. Days passed. Life went on as if nothing had changed. Olivia tried to act normal, but I could see the fear in her eyes every time she looked at me. She knew something was coming, but neither of us said it out loud. The results arrived on a quiet Thursday afternoon. I locked myself in my office, heart pounding as I opened the email. Jeremy, a match. Relief washed over me, even if it was brief. He was mine. But then I scrolled down. Melissa, not a match. My vision blurred. I sat there, staring at the words, feeling the ground shift beneath me. My little girl, the one I'd sung to sleep, the one who ran to me every morning for hugs, wasn't my biological daughter. The betrayal ran deeper than I ever imagined. That night, after the kids were asleep, I walked into the living room. Olivia was sitting on the couch, fidgeting with her hands. She looked up, her face filled with dread. "You got the results," she said quietly. I nodded, sitting down across from her. "Jeremy's mine," I said, my voice hollow. "But Melissa isn't." Tears welled up in her eyes. "Michael. Who's her father?" She shook her head. "I don't know." "Don't lie to me." "I'm not," she cried, wiping at her cheeks. "It was that one time. I didn't know his name. I never saw him again." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my composure. "You let me believe she was mine for 6 years." 6 years, Olivia." "I didn't know for sure," she whispered. "And I was scared. I thought if I told you the truth, I'd lose everything." I stood up, pacing the room. "You don't get to play the victim here. Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" "To her? What happens when Melissa finds out? What do I tell her?" "She doesn't have to know," Olivia said quickly. "You're her father in every way that matters." "No," I said sharply. "I'm not. I'm just the man who's been raising someone else's child. You've been lying to both of us." Silence stretched between us, broken only by Olivia's quiet sobs. After a long moment, I sat back down, rubbing my hands over my face. "What am I supposed to do now?" I whispered. Olivia leaned forward, desperate. "We fix this. We keep going, like we always have. We love her. We love both of them." I looked up at her, my eyes burning with tears. "I've loved her since the day she was born. That's never going to change." Olivia nodded, hope flickering in her eyes. "But what I can't figure out," I continued, my voice hardening, "is how to love you after everything you've done." Her face crumpled, and she buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I stayed seated, unmoving, staring into the distance. The silence between us said everything. I thought this was the end of the revelations. But the worst part was still to come. The next few days were unbearable. I couldn't look at Olivia without feeling sick. The trust, the love I'd built my life on, had crumbled. But the hardest part wasn't the betrayal, it was looking at Melissa. She was still my little girl, still the same bright, curious child who adored me. But now, every time she hugged me, I felt that ache deep in my chest. She wasn't mine by blood. And yet, she was mine in every way that mattered. One evening, I sat alone in my office, staring at the DNA results again. I knew I needed to confront Olivia. I needed the full truth, no more lies, no more half-confessions. But what I didn't expect was to find another clue. I noticed something in the report I hadn't paid much attention to before, a note about familial matches. Melissa's DNA had been compared against other samples in the system. And there was a partial match. My hands trembled as I clicked to open the file. The match was close, too close. My heart stopped. The DNA partially matched my own. Melissa wasn't my biological daughter, but she was related to me. There was only one horrifying possibility. I stumbled out of my office, my legs shaky, and found Olivia in the kitchen. She was stirring a pot of soup, trying to keep up the appearance of normalcy. "Michael?" she asked, surprised by my sudden appearance. I didn't say anything. I just held up my phone, the DNA report open on the screen. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Explain this." She glanced at the screen, her face going pale. I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," I snapped. "The DNA partially matches mine. Melissa is related to me. The only way that's possible is if—" I stopped, unable to say it out loud. But Olivia understood. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." She set the spoon down, gripping the edge of the counter as if to steady herself. "It was your brother." The room spun. "My brother?" I whispered. Olivia nodded, tears streaming down her face. "It was years ago. We were fighting all the time, and I was feeling lonely. I ran into him at a family event, and I don't know what happened. It was one night. Just one night. My head pounded, 1,000 thoughts racing through my mind. My brother, Daniel. He lived out of state now, but he'd been around back then. I never suspected anything. You slept with my brother. I hissed. You had a child with him and let me raise her, thinking she was mine. I was scared, she sobbed. I thought if I told you, you'd leave me. I didn't know I was pregnant at first, and by the time I found out, I couldn't bring myself to tell you. I stumbled back, gripping the wall for support. All the pieces clicked into place, the way Daniel had distanced himself from me over the years, the awkward conversations, the tension I never understood. He knew. He must have known. You've destroyed everything, I whispered. Olivia dropped to her knees, sobbing. Please, Michael. I love you. I've always loved you. Love? I spat. You don't do this to someone you love. I made a mistake, she wailed. I've spent every day trying to make up for it. Please, don't take it out on Melissa. She loves you. That hit me hard. Melissa was innocent in all of this. She didn't know. And I couldn't punish her for Olivia's sins. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. I need time, I said. Time to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do next. Over the next few days, I ignored Olivia's attempts to talk. I couldn't face her. Instead, I focused on the kids, especially Melissa. One evening, she crawled into my lap, holding a book. Will you read to me, Daddy? I stared at her for a long moment, my heart breaking all over again. Of course, sweetheart, I said softly, pulling her close. And in that moment, I realized something. It didn't matter whose DNA she carried. She was my daughter. I'd raised her, loved her, and nothing could change that. But my relationship with Olivia? That was another story. The final confrontation was coming. And this time, there would be no going back. I avoided Olivia for days. I couldn't look at her without feeling that sharp, gut-wrenching ache. Every time I thought about what she had done, what she had taken from me, I felt the walls closing in. But I knew I couldn't keep avoiding her forever. Finally, one evening after the kids were asleep, she knocked softly on the office door. Michael? Her voice was hesitant, fragile. Can we talk? I stared at the desk for a long time before answering. Come in. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her shoulders slumped. But I didn't feel any sympathy. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. What do you want to say? She took a deep breath. I've been thinking a lot about everything, about what I did to you. And I know that there's no excuse. I know I hurt you in ways I can't even begin to fix. I stayed silent, letting her talk. I want to be honest, she continued. For once. No more lies, no more half-truths. I raised an eyebrow. You think honesty is going to fix this? No, she admitted, her voice trembling. But it's all I have left. She sat down across from me, wringing her hands nervously. I've spent years lying to myself, convincing myself that I could keep everything together. That I could make you happy and keep my secret buried. But it's all fallen apart. I leaned forward, my voice cold. Why Daniel? She flinched. It wasn't planned. It wasn't like I sought him out. We were at your parents' anniversary party, and we were both drunk. I was feeling distant from you, and he reminded me of you. My stomach turned. That's supposed to make me feel better. I snapped. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed our family. You betrayed our kids. I know, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. And I hate myself for it. But Michael, I never stopped loving you. I swear. I shook my head. You don't get to say that. You don't get to talk about love after everything you've done. She sobbed quietly, wiping her face. Please. I just want to know if there's any hope. Can we fix this? I stared at her for a long time. The woman sitting in front of me wasn't the same person I'd married. Or maybe she was, and I'd just never seen the truth. I don't know, I said finally. I honestly don't know if I can ever forgive you. She nodded slowly, as if she'd expected that answer. What about the kids? She asked, her voice barely audible. What about Melissa? That question cut deep. I took a long, shaky breath before answering. I'm her father, I said quietly. No matter what the DNA says. I've been there since the day she was born. That's never going to change. Olivia let out a sob of relief. Thank you. But you? I continued, my voice hardening. I don't know if we have a future. I can't promise you anything. She wiped her eyes, trying to steady herself. I understand. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, I stood. I need space, Olivia. I need time to figure out what comes next. She nodded again, her expression devastated. Okay. As she turned to leave, I stopped her. One more thing, I said. She looked back at me, hopeful. If you ever try to contact Daniel again, I said coldly, you'll lose everything. I mean it. I won't let you destroy what's left of this family. Her face crumpled, but she nodded. I won't. I swear. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I thought about Melissa and Jeremy, about the life I'd built, and the lies that had torn it apart. I didn't know what the future held. But one thing was clear, I wasn't going to let Olivia, or anyone, take my kids away from me.